Thank you, Alwyn. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for coming this evening. I have to admit to feeling slightly terrified, but it is really nice to see my friends and to see my family and really to see so many people who've been involved in these projects. I can't do justice to all this work in 45 minutes, so I'm going to try and draw on a few things to help illustrate some of the ideas and some of the work. But I'm going to have to leave a lot out. I'm going to have to leave out everything that I feel could confuse you or suggest things that suggest our own meanings. We put our own meanings so much onto everything that we see, and to open up to maybe explore the magic that other people bring to these experiences. It's about movement. So when you arrived this evening, you all managed to get here. You navigated through space, you used your bodies in different ways, you use your muscles, you use your weight, you used your imagination. And it was as if by magic. Nobody actually told you what to do. You're actually using your bodies to think with. So this talk is really about the importance of drawing on how we use our bodies to think with. We tend to think that all thinking goes on in the mind, and particularly when we're thinking about learning and teaching, we tend to expect that most of the learning, particularly people with learning disabilities, that most of the learning goes on in the mind. But actually what I want to try and show this evening is actually learning goes on through our bodies. And when we explore these possibilities through our bodies, through the bodily sensations, we actually could find new ways, not only of learning about people, but helping people in the way that they learn. So I'm going to divide the talk into 5 different themes. We've kind of touched on movement already, but movement is the overarching theme for everything. So movement, attention, generation, independence, and choreography, they're all very important to every stage of the work that I'm going to show you, but I'm going to separate them a little bit just to try and explain how the work has developed and to maybe explain a little bit about some of the people who've been involved. Each theme has emerged in a different context and a different setting, and I will try also to explain how the settings have been very important and very influential in how the design has emerged. So the first theme is attention, and I'm going to attempt to hold your attention for nearly 40 minutes, which is quite a big ask. The important thing about attention and why we need to be thinking about attention is in order to absorb new information, in order to learn, we need to be using our attention, and we need to know what it is we should be attending to. So if you think about all the information that's around us all the time, and even when you're listening to me, there's lots of different types of information. There's the slides, for example. There's me, there's my movement, there's my chatter, there's awareness of one another. There's lots of things here which can actually be distracting and draw your attention away from the things that you really need to be listening to. So in terms of design, the first thing that I became interested in, and particularly when I met with the Holly School, who are here with Glynis and Dovey. Where are you? Holly School, just wave. Here, here, yeah, Holly School, they're here. So in about early 2000, I met with Glynis at the Holly School, and I started to research a little bit about autism. So, as you'll know, theory can be very dehumanizing. It'll tell you lots about deficits, for example, and the deficits in autism were around attention, social communication, ritualistic behavior. But in actual fact, when I met with Glynis and I went to the school, I actually met a whole load of children who were very different, very interesting, and actually spending time with them just opened up a whole different world that didn't necessarily mean that working with theory would be very helpful. But we did need to come up with an idea, and so working with Glynis, we thought about what's important for those particular young children, and the important thing was to develop their concentration. So the first designs, and the designs for reacticles, was simply about that, about being able to develop concentration by watching something, knowing what to attend to, and being able to shift focus gently so that it's not stressful, there's no right and wrong, but the information is there, we know what we need to attend to, but we're not stuck. We need to shift, we need to move. So when we think about how we use our attention, it's not about holding your attention on one thing all the time. It's knowing what to attend to and how to shift it gently from one thing to another. So early ideas were about using technology, existing technology. It's not kind of stuff that's state of the art. It's things that are around, things that we're using already, but use it in interesting ways. So these first ideas were using the mouse to bring a circle to life. So circles might seem to be quite benign and quite ordinary, but they're very interesting. They're very easy to attend to. But circles have all sorts of imaginary properties. And so what I was trying to do at the time was connect the possibilities of movement through the mouse to what you could possibly do with a circle. So as you can see in this little bit of video, the person, actually it's my son, we had to make this fairly recently for the purposes of this occasion, is using the mouse, and what's happening on the screen is completely tracing his movement. There's gentle shifts of focus. There's nothing there that's going to draw his attention away from that circle, but the more he moves it, the more his attention is being grabbed and maintained. So using a mouse is very simple. We also explored using a keyboard. So a keyboard might seem to be quite a functional piece of equipment that we use to work with our computers. But actually, if you think of a keyboard as something magical, it has pressure, it has location, it has a beautiful shape, it has texture. So what I was interested in is actually, could we grab attention, develop attention, maintain attention by bringing this kind of the physicality of the computer, the pressure, the movement, the space, close to that circle, so that you have this really sophisticated cause and effect. So here's a little example of how that works. Oh, wrong video. Something weird's happened with my videos here. Hang on, I'm just gonna, that's not supposed to happen. Let's try again. Okay. So the sound that you're hearing is for the next video. So if you just think about the sound isn't part of this video. I never worked with computers. So what we're doing here is we're mapping the interaction of touch and pressure on the keyboard to the possibilities for action in the circle. So what the circle is doing is basically playing with the hands. But there's no failure here, there's no right and wrong. I'll move it on because that wasn't supposed to happen. And I will talk about this in a minute. But the thing about the keyboard is that we really mapped this idea of pressure with the circle. And although failure is important for learning, it has to happen at the right time. If failure happens too early, it can be demotivating and disengaging. So it's really important that whatever we did, whatever the children did when they were exploring, it was rewarded, and that reward was spontaneous. And it was feeding back to them that they were in control, that it was about them, so that everybody's movement is different, everybody's pressure is different. So instead of the interface being everybody does the same thing, if you get it right, you get a big smile, and if you get it wrong, you get a system beep, it's more about, well, everything that we do should be an exploration and encourage more exploration. So that was the mouse and the keyboard, but a big, great breakthrough came when we started working with the interactive whiteboard. So in about 2003, interactive whiteboards were introduced to all schools in Wales. And initially, they were used as interactive blackboards because we'd learned from a previous use of the board, and the teacher would be mostly at the front, and then the child would be invited, and they would be able to do things for themselves, and that was fantastic. However, what we found when we started creating reacticles for interactive whiteboard is that actually you can use the whole body. And instead of the purpose being about control and function, so you press the button and you get the right answer, so what happens when you touch the whiteboard and you move slightly, and whatever you're doing follows you. So we had this whole series of circles that would follow your movement around the interactive whiteboard. And there were two really, really important findings from this research. It seems very simple, but it is very important in terms of developing language and communication. So the first thing is if you're using your finger to control the interaction, as you can see here, and I will play this video, what you're doing is you're drawing attention through your finger to your action. So that means that we know where that child is attending, and other people who are attending with that child also know where to attend. So you have this beautiful joint attention. And any of you who know a little bit about development of language, joint attention is really important. We need to know what to attend to ourselves, but we also need to be able to connect our attention with other people's. So what we have here, by using the finger to control, we have our own sense of control, we have our own sense of autonomy, but we also have an opportunity for other people to join in and share with what we're doing. But the other great thing is it's about movement. And we hadn't really thought that interactive whiteboards would be about movement. It seems really obvious. But actually, because we'd inherited the interactive whiteboard from the blackboard, we were just thinking it as a large blackboard. So I'll show you this little bit of video which might explain that with the right sound. Okay, I'm just going to move on a little bit, but just to, again, talk a little bit about that video. So yeah, you've got these beautiful, great big gross motor movements, full body movements. That's really important to be able to just move around and have that experience to learn through our body movements. We were able to really follow his attention and really connect with what he was doing. The children, you could hear in the background, they were all joining in. They were really sharing that experience. They were adding their own imagination. They were introducing language. That all might seem fairly obvious to you, but actually, for that particular group of children, it's quite unusual. The other thing about the interactive whiteboard was actually, as you're touching and as you're moving, you're getting instant feedback on what you're doing. And that's really, really important. Again, it's another thing we take for granted. We know we need feedback for learning, but how often does the feedback happen immediately? It's very often delayed. It's very often afterwards that you get the feedback. But actually, it's really important that that feedback is immediate. You're getting immediate self-affirmation. And what we saw from the video and many, many other examples, I could just fill this whole half hour or so with lovely examples of just the interactive whiteboards. But what you saw was real creativity, real exploration. So reacticles taught me that design is actually not about what you put in, but it's really about what you choose to leave out. Very simple circle. If you didn't know this, that the circle is the Jungian symbol of self, and auto, the Greek for self, I think it's Greek, I hope it is auto and autism, and you get autonomy and autotelic, all those lovely words around auto, around self. We learned so much about that just by the Reacticles project, And I really have to thank the Hollies for their role in that. I just never would have made those discoveries had it not been through working with those teachers and with the school. So Reacticles, actually we had a licensed version. We sold Reacticles across the US, Australia, Europe, and it was translated into Chinese, and it was used by the VSO in China to teach young Chinese children. So that's pretty cool, and not something that I set out to do, but it shows that actually by engaging with people, and particularly by engaging with the schools, they tell other people, and they tell other people, and they tell other people, and then it's around the world. And that was a total surprise. But what this little bit of revenue enabled us to do was to carry on being very experimental and not to have to rely on big funding bodies in order to take the research further. And in 2007, I pitched an idea to MIP TV in Cannes, which sounds really cool, but I didn't actually go to Cannes, but friends of mine went. Anyway, that's a shame. But pitched this idea to MIP TV about a mobile version of Reacticles. At the time, the iPhone had only just come across to the UK. There's a little bit of excitement about it, but it certainly wasn't the phenomena it is now. And we certainly didn't have iPads. But we started to get interested in small devices and using accelerometers. So if you imagine you've got your Reactical circle and it's on like a PSP or an iPhone, so you can shake it and tilt it and do all sorts of really cool things with it. So we started working with Amanda Kirby at the Discovery Centre. I don't think Amanda's here, but Catherine might be here. Anyway, hello, Discovery Centre here. Working with some of the young children who were coming to the Discovery Centre for workshops. And we started working with them to explore ideas for using movement on small devices. I'm going to whiz ahead because those ideas actually became, in what was in 2010, Reacticles Magic. So we now have iPads. So taking some of these ideas onto iPad, we started to explore things like simple movements left to right, things getting bigger and smaller, using speed, using space. Again, simple idea of using the circle, tracing the finger, and in doing that, really learning about actually what you can do with an iPad. But there's no instructions, and the rules are really, really simple. But this is really important because a lot of the interfaces for iPads at the time were much more sophisticated. And actually, the more sophisticated these become, the more difficult it is to learn with them. So it was stripping all that back and just making it about simple cause and effect. And it was designing Reacticles Magic that I really got interested in rhythm. So what we found as the children were starting to explore with the iPad is that they'd use lots of repetitious actions, lots of kind of repeat and repeat and repeat. But if you think about repetition as rhythm, because when you touch the iPad, I've got one here. I'm not going to load all this up, but you're just touching like this. You get feedback and there's a lovely rhythm to it. So it was starting to think of the iPad almost as a rhythmic instrument. But of course, the circle is giving that feedback so you know where you are and you know it's about you, it's yours. So early ideas for iPad were just simply taking the circle and introducing rhythms. The iPad the iPad app became a big success. And for the first, I think, 3 years that it was released, we were getting about 500 downloads a month, which is not bad for an application that doesn't do anything. And it's been on the recommended apps for autism and research autism. So the reason that is happening is because those people are using it and they're downloading it and they're tweeting about it. It's all about them, and it's really about them taking ownership of it. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about the need to take ownership in design. So a little bit of video of the iPad app. So this was working with Beechwood College, and this is a unit for adults on the autism spectrum. It's a residential college. Lots of the young people need one-to-one care. Okay, so just to put that in context, with that particular group in that specialist unit, they hadn't used iPads before, and when I started working with them and I wanted to use the iPad, it was, no, it's probably not a good idea to give them iPads. And I was like, well, it's not my iPad, I don't really mind, you know, what's the worst that can happen? But we started introducing iPads to the group, and it's very easy to use, and as a result of doing that, they started using iPads for that particular group of adults, which was really important because iPads can be very liberating. They do not cure autism, okay? But they are, for some people, they give them the freedom to do things that they would not normally be able to do. So it was great that the project, if nothing else, at least got those guys using iPads, and they would have those wonderful opportunities. So we also explored projecting reacticles into larger spaces, and this is where I met Ashgrove School, and Ashgrove School are here, so they're in the front row there. And actually particularly working with Ruth, Joy and Ben, who are really open-minded about the possibilities of using some of this software with probably some of the hardest to engage young people in the school. And so projecting reacticles actually really helped to develop the ideas for the next project. So the next project is semantics, and the theme I'm going to talk about is generation. And why generation? It's because what I was really interested in now is how can we use this idea of repetition, because we repeat all the time. We need to repeat to practice, we repeat for learning, yet very often, particularly in the autism diagnosis, repetition can be seen as something unwanted, something that we should try to move people away from repetition. But if you're repeating your movements, no two movements are ever the same. So instead of thinking of repetition as something that's locked in, thinking of repetition as something that really opens out. So the ideas for semantics were actually grab the attention, acknowledge the movement, draw on the movement, trace the movement, feed the movement back, and see if we can generate new movements. So because no two movements are the same, everybody owns their own movement. And it's an opportunity for us to explore movement, not as something that is wanted or unwanted, or that it's gestural, or that it's functional. It just is. And let's see what happens when we bring movement into our attention. And let's see what happens. So the ideas for semantics were really about that simple thing of how can we bring movement to the forefront of our attention. So we developed an iPad app, but I don't really want to talk about that so much. I'm going to move on to the next bit, which is really looking at body movement. So in exploring movement with Ashgrove School, we thought about all the different ways in which we could start to visualize movement. Very important was the idea of simplification, that actually we mustn't confuse the environment with too many things to do. It really needs to be dead simple. But what we need to do is actually show the traces of movement and see what possibilities emerge from that. So the idea of geometry is really to simplify around beautiful shapes and patterns, and to let that be what it is, and not try to make it too much about task or trying to achieve something. Let's just see what happens when we see our body movements. So I'm going to show you this little bit of video. We took semantics back to the Hollies, so this is back in the Hollies. But this is one of my favourite bits of video, that it says so much about movement and about this individual young man who was thought to be non-verbal, or preferably non-verbal. He was having difficulties with concentration. I think when we did this, Glynis, he hadn't used it before, or maybe he used it once, so it was a bit of an experiment. But I'm just going to let you enjoy this. So just at the end, he stops and he's looking around to see if anybody else is watching him. That's just a priceless moment. You know, in communication, it's when we have something to say, and we've got something we want to communicate, and we want to share it with somebody else. You know, that video really says that. He's really showing that actually he's aware of what he's doing. He's really experimenting. There's lovely pauses. And one of the things I've learned, and it surprised me, was actually we need to pause as well. I'm thinking we need to get everybody moving. Movement's great, you know, let's all move. But actually we also need to pause, and we need to know when to stop our movements. And stopping our movements, to pause, to reflect on them, to take in new information. That's what he's doing. He's exploring quite sophisticated concepts of space and of time. He's very relaxed. And I think that video actually goes on for about 20 minutes, and there's just really beautiful concentration there. But this idea of language emerging through movement, again, the opportunities to draw attention to ourselves, to explore what we're doing, to bring our movements to life. But very importantly, it's about your movement, and not discounting a movement that might appear to be one that we don't really want because it appears to be self-stimulatory, or it doesn't necessarily have the meaning that we're looking for. So if we're always searching for the meaning in the movement, we're in danger of losing some of these beautiful things that just happen. So I'm just going to show a little bit of video here of a young man that I worked with a lot. He was great fun to work with, and he used semantics a lot. So in the first video, I think that was the first or second time the child had used it. In this particular video, the young man we're going to see had used it a lot and didn't use speech particularly. He might have had some receptive language, but he certainly didn't use speech to express himself. But he'd been using semantics for quite a while, and yeah, I think I'll just let you watch it. So, Ben, you're next. So yeah, that was definitely just me saying not to discount movements that might not appear to have any meaning. And the great thing about working with these particular pupils and working with Ash Grove School is that we really were able to look at how movement, when it comes into consciousness, when we start to recognize we exist through our movement, what these possibilities are for learning and for language. So here's Ben, and I'm drawing on this bit of video, Ben, oh, I'm so sorry, but it's great, to just really show how the teachers have been able to observe the children when they're moving through these large-scale interactions and to focus on their interest and to learn from the children's interest. So lots of interventions are designed by other people, and they're things that are done for you. And what we've been trying to do is not say that they're not important, because they definitely are, but to look at complementary processes, to look at the possibility for the independence to choose what it is that you want to do and to get other people to connect to that. So in this video, Ben is talking about how he connected with the children in his class by watching and observing their large geometric gestural movements.
When I walked into the pupils, I didn't know what was going to happen. It's people-led, so I turn it on, and then whenever it pops up on the screen with all the different icons, they choose which one they want to do. And if they find that difficult for some reason, then I'll just narrow the choices down until it's just two. Pick one. So they're deciding everything. And then I'm just adding to that conversation. So here, jacks.
1, 2.
2 jacks.
Shacks. That.
So Ethan was looking at the screen with Jack on it. So it just asked another question about how many jacks were on screen, because it seemed like that was something that at that particular moment we could talk about. But we could have done anything. We could have been doing like parts of the body that you could see. We could have been doing like like how to spell different bits, or like is that a leg or an arm? How many arms, how many legs? How many?
1, 2, 3, 4. There's none left.
It's just creating dialogue, first of all, with one of the pupils, and then bringing other people into that, so they're talking to each other, and then stepping back. So by the end of it, I hasn't even asking Ethan questions, he's just doing it by himself. Like, I only had to ask him how many jacks once, and then he did it like 3 times that whole by himself. So he's just, so I just suggested that, in a sense, I suggest that that's a game that he can play. And then that's all I need to do. He can do it by himself.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so moving on, and the next project, So Mobility. So in case you hadn't noticed, I quite like making up names, and it's actually very important. So developing an identity for your project by giving it a name, it really helps people to engage with that and to take ownership of it. So if I call these projects some interaction design about autism or something, he's going to remember that. It's really about having something that people can say for themselves, and it's my project. So semantics is very much about, actually, are we going to do semantics, or are we going to do reacticals, or it's reacticals day, or it's, And So Mobility was taking this idea of soma, which is the body, and ability, and mobility. So the kind of tagline I think we came up with, Cass here, Kath from Rhonda kind of Task Skills for Independence, was absolutely brilliant in making this project come to life. But we kind of worked with this idea of soma and ability and mobility. And the idea was to make movement irresistible. So I met Kath through having done some work with the Touch Trust. And actually, we were using semantics in the touch trust when I met Kath. And we put together some ideas for a project that would work with adults with profound and multiple learning disabilities. So there's a couple of important points to make here. When young people leave school, they're no longer in education provision that works with a particular diagnosis. They go into adult services where you'll have people with all sorts of different diagnoses, different disabilities all together, and they're all together in a community, and they're usually all together in a community, in community centres. So the community is very, very supportive. But in these centres, the opportunities to be doing really interesting things with movement are quite limited. It's limited in terms of space, it's limited in terms of time, and it's limited in terms of appropriateness, because actually being able to take part, for example, in sports activities, it's just, for some people, just not possible. But yet we know movement is really, really important. We also know that as you get older, you're still a learner. And it's really important that we don't discount people just because they're adults as non-learners. I'm not going to go into neuroplasticity, but there is great research out there now which shows how the brain continues to develop and it needs the right kind of stimulation. So working with Rhonda and Taff, we explored different ideas that could help those people in that community to move their bodies more. But it's really about independence. And this is something I hadn't really thought about in terms of design. You tend to think that independence means going off and you do something yourself. But in actual fact, independence is really about being who you are. Having the independence to be yourself in whatever way is appropriate. So the design really had to incorporate a lot of different people, different ages, different needs, but give them the independence to make the choices that were their choices. So that was really important in terms of designing an interface. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about that. So the So Mobility interface was beautiful, actually, aesthetically pleasing. We kind of worked very closely with the centre. The idea that people might have a learning disability doesn't mean that the design should be in any way dumbed down. If anything, it should be opened up. So really conscious that the design needs to feel beautiful. It needs to invite people. It needs to make people that want to join in. It needs to be irresistible. So we worked on lots of design concepts and came up with the idea for 3 types of interaction. So that's reach, balance, and flow. Reaching. Balance, thinking about your body weight, and flow, very much about the interaction of movement. We worked with Kath and her team to come up with some ideas for these concepts. I hope you won't mind me saying, Kath, but they were quite concerned about task and people being able to achieve particular skills. And so the ideas they came up with were really about how we can develop these skills, how we can get them to do these tasks. But actually what we really explored was movement. So if the task is to collect things, what kind of movement is that about? So we explored a number of concepts about movement and reach, balance, and flow. Importantly, we needed to work with people who might have a visual disability, which meant we needed high contrast. We needed to work with people who might have a poor sense of self. So we used a lot of mirroring. But it also needed to be playful. So I'm just going to show a bit of video of that project. Okay, Kath? This is your moment.
That was the first time when Wendy came to introduce us and telling us about the project and the technology. None of us knew what was going to happen.
So I had a lot of staff calling into these sessions saying, you like this, I'm not going to be very happy.
It was a bit daunting on how is it going to happen with our service users.
And then at the end of it, they were saying, oh, this is absolutely fantastic. You know, so it's like breath of fresh air.
Because I really had no clue and I didn't know whether it would work. But I'm really so pleased because at the moment, as we are trying to engage with our service users, Like we have some service users that couldn't engage in any activity. Some people may think clapping doesn't mean anything, but just clapping is like, it's an exercise for someone and it is fun.
So we're almost running out of time, we're nearly there, but I want to, one of the reasons I showed that bit of video, I could have showed lots more, is to actually introduce you to my design partner, Joel Gethin-Lewis. So I've been talking a lot about we. I do not do this work on my own. And since about 2007, I've been working with Joel. We met at the Victoria and Albert Museum at the Decode exhibition where we were doing workshops with reacticles. Joel's on the autism spectrum and he contacted me and said, if ever you need somebody to help you with this stuff, just let me know. And we've kind of been joined at the hip ever since as design partners. And a lot of the programming that you see here, I haven't done that. So I would love to say I had, but I haven't. And that's really thanks to Joel. So that's I needed to say that. And that project was in the final 3 for the Social Accolade Awards last year, which was just such a brilliant acknowledgement of all the work of that community and all the people. The guys who've been involved in the project, they came to Cardiff from Aberdare or Treforest and places, and had a lovely day out at the National Museum of Wales. And it was just such an honour to be actually acknowledged for that work. So well done, Kath. So finally, my next project, which is pretty much the end of the talk and what I'm doing now, is exploring opportunities to bring those people who are amazing developers like Joel and amazing dancers and creators like some of the dancers I've worked with much closer together with the communities of people who could really benefit from having these quite extraordinary, creative, playful opportunities. So the idea is to run a code club, and I think Oliver's here from Raspberry Pi, and so I just want to mention the Raspberry Pi. This is, if you haven't seen one before, this is a Raspberry Pi. It was announced last week that 11 million have been sold to date. They're manufactured in Pencoed. They're cheap-ish, under 50 quid, less than that. But the great thing about the Raspberry Pi is it's been developed to teach people to code. So by working with Raspberry Pi, we're actually taking some of these concepts and creating them to work on Raspberry Pi and using this to teach people how to code some of these lovely things that we've been designing. We are talking to Autism Connections in Cardiff, and Raj and Gareth are here, if you haven't left yet. About actually running a code club here in Cardiff. That's teaching people who have a passion for coding, people with autism on the autism spectrum, to create lovely technologies with code, but to make these available then for other people to explore and to use. That's kind of where I'm at. The ideas for Somatopia came from 5 workshops I ran in London. We developed a little system called Somatopia, which was really building on some of the fantastic applications that you've already seen, but making them possible to run on a Raspberry Pi and to teach the code. So we did a performance at the Pentland Theatre, which was just the most amazing opportunity. I worked with these people, we choreographed and did this lovely dance performance, and all the audience were dancing. I don't know if you've ever had an opportunity to do an autistic disco. It's absolutely brilliant. Any movement counts, and we had such fun. And we used Somatopia as a kind of backdrop, so people could see themselves in the background, a bit like you guys did when you came in, and they could see the performers, and there was this beautiful, magical interaction between people. So that's the idea for Somatopia. We've done some, the code has been released, and we've started to use reacticles again. Reacticles has come back into fashion to really explore what do we mean by position, by velocity, by space, by time, and going back to the circle. And the circle's a great way to actually understand those things. That's the end. And really, yeah, this is the end of my talk. I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of these lovely videos. And, you know, it's not all my work. It's really the work of so many people. But it is magical, and it's really about being able to see things differently when you're not looking for something. And actually, when you don't look for something, you find all this extraordinary stuff. Yeah, so big thank you to Cardiff Met, who've been incredibly supportive. I could not have done this work if I hadn't have been in a school of art and design where people constantly use their imagination, they play, they explore, and it's not always about finding solutions, it's about the possibilities that emerge. So, you know, I'm just very lucky. I've been here a long time, actually. I don't mean tonight, I mean, I've been here a long time. You know, the funders for these projects have been fantastic. The schools, Holly School, Teaguin School, Ashgrove School, thank you so much for coming tonight. They're all here, Trinity Fields. I had to leave out a lot of magic this evening in bringing this talk together. I'm so glad it's over, but I've actually quite enjoyed talking to you. It's been all right. I was terrified before I started, and now it's done. I think it was okay. So I've left out a lot of magic, but there are opportunities for questions. Yeah. Thank you very much.